Recording in progress.
As you can know, recording in progress has started. Just some bookkeeping. Please, everybody online, type your name in the actual, what would it be? Chat bar. First name, last initial. Anything else, Riley, we need to talk about? Okay, perfect. So tonight's talk is going to be the subluxation complex. If you have come or been educated from other chiropractors, what I'm going to talk about is going to sound pretty foreign. We're going to be looking at a brain-based concept, not just the structural abnormality or change that happens from the brain-based information. With that being said, my hope is that we come with an open heart and open mind. My goal is to empower, uplift, and help you change not just your lives, but every single person that you run into. So if we have some new knowledge, my hope is that we share it and help other friends and family members. So if you have been educated from other practitioners, they talk about misalignments of bones. We will get into that, but what we want to look at is what's actually causing that misalignment to happen in the first place. So have we ever learned about the 3 T's, or have we learned about the causes of subluxation? If we haven't, I'll go over them first off. So the 3 causes of subluxation are the 3 forms of stress. So the 3 T's comes into thoughts, what we think, traumas, physical, emotional, different things like that, and then toxins, the things that we're exposed to. So if we think about thought processes, and these are the recurring ones that we commonly have to help people deal with here, it's, are we putting in good or are we putting in bad? So most people aren't aware that you can actually help your brain change the way it perceives reality by what you put in. So if you watch murder mysteries every night, you're going to actually be thinking about murder mysteries all through the night, and you're going to input that information, and you'll actually change your perception of reality to expect that to be the world around you. If we put in happiness every night, watching dogs play, whatever it is, then that's the reality that we have. So our brain is like a computer, and whatever we put in is what it expects to come out. So when we know that, we can understand that literally what we focus on is what we will see in our life. And an example of this is when we get a new car, what do we start seeing around us? The exact car that we have everywhere.
That's so true.
And that's because we focus on that one thing, and that's how we understand what's actually happening is we only have a limited amount of energy. So we're going to focus on the things we know. So we want to be aware of what do we want. So that's where we want to put our focus. If we want more of whatever it is, that's where our focus goes. So that's how thoughts can apply. Traumas, that's going to be your falls, your trips, your car accidents, you're sitting for long periods of time, your bacterial viral infections will actually come in here into the physical because they are a physical entity and they can cause inflammation. The big one, though, that most people aren't aware of is how bad head injuries are. So that football injury that you had when you were 12, if we aren't doing proper neural rehab or preventative care, it will literally go throughout your life. And if you've never seen it, you can look up CTE, which stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And what it is it will show you the brains of football players, and they literally look like Swiss cheese. There's not supposed to be big holes in them. And that's from that chronic inflammation. So of all of them, the one that I never like hearing about is a head injury. Concussion at all. Hit on the head at all. That's a big elephant in the room that we need to stop. There are ways to stop it, but be aware that's the thing that can literally drive major dysfunction throughout your life. It could be that you fell out of a tree when you were 5. You had a car accident when this happened. And those things are the big drivers, one of the big drivers of subluxation. And then toxins. These are going to be the things we eat, the things we drink, and the things we breathe. So the other day when I walked out, I smelled fire. So it could be forest fire stuff. It could be most people aren't aware that the water here in Colorado is actually really toxic for you. There's a lot of heavy metals in it. There's like lead and mercury and stuff naturally in the water. So having a filter to pull those heavy metals and toxins out is really important for Colorado people. Then we can also look at the foods we're eating. Are they organic? Are they grass-fed? Are they full of chemicals? Are they something you can pronounce on the back of the thing? Does it say water, or does it say sugar, or does it say some word that you have no clue what it is? That's usually not something that's going to be good for you. So those are the things that can drive us. And if you understand, we don't need to be all or nothing. If we try to push 90 to 80% eating the right way, we're going to do good. If we don't get head injuries, that's going to make everything a lot easier. And if we change our thought process, that will help as well. So these are the things that can drive us into the subluxation complex. And what I want you to understand about the subluxation is simplistically, it's your body being in fight or flight. That's what a subluxation is. If you want to understand it, that's what we're going to get into more. But what it is, based on NBCE, is an abnormal neurological pattern that leads to dysfunction or disease. And the key in that is abnormal. So abnormal neurological pattern. So what happens is, if we're functioning correctly, our brain is balanced. One side is equal to the other. We're within certain percentages. And that balance allows us to use both left and right hemispheres, and we're able to see the world correctly, and we're not stuck in fight or flight. What causes us to go in fight or flight is our frontal lobe getting weak and our cerebellum getting weak. Those are the two areas that, if they're not working correctly, will cause us to go into fight or flight, cause us to go into protection mode. That is rudimentary what drives the subluxation. When we look at the brain through the EEG, those patterns that we see are subluxated patterns. So what is the common subluxation pattern that I see on every single person, except for one small group of people, and I'll tell you who they are, is when we look at the back of the brain at the O1 or the subconscious region, we see too much fast brain waves. So you have too much beta brain waves. Do you guys remember the brain waves? Or do you want me to go over them again? Go over them again? Okay. So beta is the fast brain wave. It's 13 to 38 hertz. It's your fight or flight. We'll make it real simple today. Below beta, there's alpha. And that one is 8 to 12 hertz. That's memory, being in the zone, in the flow. So if you have somebody who has a memory issue, this is the brainwave that's the culprit. If we notice we're not aging as well as we'd like, our memory isn't working as well as we like, it's alpha that is related to that. And literally there's a difference in it that will tell us what we need to push up, and the memory will literally turn back online. There's another frequency that is only found in one area of the brain, and it's called SMR, and it stands for sensory motor rhythm, and it is 12 to 15 hertz. So it's actually a little bit of alpha and some beta. And that's found right in the top of the brain. It's where you perceive sensations. So smell, hear, touch, different things like that. That's called the sensory motor cortex. Below that, there's theta. And theta is 3.5 to 8 hertz. And this is subconscious. This is when emotional healing happens. This is when we're intuitive. This is when new ideas come up. So what happens is, and we're good on this? Perfect. In the back of the brain, the pattern that I see in probably 90 to 95% of people is that they're in a protective state. So their subconscious produces too much beta and not enough theta. And so what that looks like is we talk about a theta over beta ratio. And in the back of the brain, we're supposed to have twice as much slow to fast. So what does the body do? What is the pattern it uses to protect you? It makes more fast so that you're aware. That's a subluxation pattern. That's a pattern of your brain being overreactive to try to protect you. So what does this look like in your life? You want to know if you have a subluxation? This is that brain chatter that never shuts up. What about this? What about that? And I have to take care of this and that and all those things. That's that subluxation pattern. Yes, sir.
Now, why the term subluxation?
Why the term subluxation? Because that's the term that chiropractors coined. So they coined it because it literally indicates the dysfunction that we look for. So the subluxation is looking at the neurological driver, and then physically what they found was a bone out of alignment. So subluxation, if you look at it through very mechanistic terms, is less than a luxation, full dislocation, but it's a misalignment. That's what a subluxation looks at. Now, if you look at it through philosophical, it also means less light or less expression of light or less expression of energy. And what we did is we went all the way back to the brain. And when you look at the brain, you can actually find the patterns that would cause that misalignment. Good question. So when we see this, this is that pattern, that subluxation pattern in the brain of that subconscious. There's only 3 or 4 people I've ever met that don't have this. And they're all children that had developmental issues. So they weren't even aware that they needed to be stressed out. So that subconscious wasn't stressed out. But they couldn't interpret the information correctly. So they weren't aware of what was going on. So subconscious wasn't stressed out, but they couldn't take in information correctly. Once we've trained people, I see it stabilized, but that's one of the ones that we'll see commonly show up. So does that make sense so far? Perfect. So what's interesting and what we need to understand is that your brain builds whatever repeats chronically. So whatever your brain repeats chronically is what you will build. So if we take this physically, if physically your body has that pattern in the brain where one side is stronger than the other and it causes a misalignment in the bones, it will actually, the bones, how they're aligned, will feed the brain and tell it what to perceive. So it'll actually tell the brain that this is normal, and you'll actually train yourself to be crooked. If you do that long enough, you can have one side where muscles are weak on one side or strong on the other. So what does that look like? What does that pattern look like when I see somebody comes in? That's when I look at them and their foot is flared out. That's a subluxation pattern. That's a pattern of a brain that is fatiguing on one side. So if we look at the motor cortex and we just talk about a big muscle, we look at it and we see, okay, whichever side the subluxation is on, the weakness is on, that muscle will actually shorten. So the butt muscle shortens and it actually causes your foot to flare out. So that's one indication of a subluxation. So the brain is weak, so the muscle shortens to try to protect itself, and it will literally cause that flare to happen. So that's if we look at that subluxation based on a physical issue. What if the subluxation is based on your ability to manage stress? The frontal lobe is deactivating. And if you remember from other talks, we look at the brainstem, that's that fight-flight response. The 2 areas that inhibit or deactivate the fight-flight response are the cerebellum from the bottom and the frontal lobe from the top. So when we become physiologically stressed, what happens? Blood flow will actually leave your frontal lobe. That means the nerves in your frontal lobe that determine how healthy you are turn off. So this is, if you've ever been in a major car accident, this is when you can't speak. Because you're so stressed out, you just can't think or speak. Or you're so stressed out, you just can't say the words. It's called a frontal lobe escape. It's when your frontal lobe literally has been so stressed out that you go into brainstem, fight, flight, all or nothing. When people say it's either you're for me or against me, that all or nothing mentality, that's a brainstem mentality. That's a lower concept of reality of what's actually going on. So when that happens, the brainstem turns off, then you start operating out of, or the frontal lobe turns off, you start operating out of the brainstem. And now we can start seeing major issues show up, because if the brainstem is running everything, you start going into protective state. So a protective state is going to be high cortisol, high blood pressure. A protective state is going to be changing where blood flow goes. So where does blood flow go when you need to fight? It goes to your heart, it goes to your lungs, and it is removed from your frontal lobe, your hands, your feet, and your digestive tract. So if you're stressed out and you're operating in your brainstem, I know digestion turns off. Now we have digestive illnesses. I know that reproduction will turn off. Now we can't reproduce. Now I just can't get pregnant because my body just won't do it. My hormones are off, because when you're in stress, your hormones will literally change. What will happen is when you're in stress, you will actually turn on an enzyme called aromatase, and you'll actually make more estrogen. And if you're not aware of this, estrogen is literally a precursor for hormone-sensitive cancers. So if you have high estrogen, you're prone to turning on cancer. Well, what turns that on? Chronic stress, turning on inflammation, will actually drive that way. Does it make sense? So we stay in stress, our hands and feet get cold. This is why I love touching your guys' hands. I can see how stressed you are. And when we adjust you and they get warm, that tells me you're actually healing, because the brainstem is relaxing. Blood flow is going back to the frontal lobe, and you're turning off that stress pattern. So that abnormal dysfunction, what we would see here, though, is we would see you're in what's called a limbic response. So if we've ever trained your frontal lobe, and we talk about high-low beta, that's me actually training your limbic, or your emotional part of your brain, to calm down, which is more midbrain. So when we look at you, these patterns will start showing up, and they tell me how you're actually healing, or are you in protection. So these patterns in the brain are the subluxation patterns. The patterns in the spine are a reflection of the brain. Now, you can get a big trauma and reset yourself. So what can happen is, if you're in, say, a motor vehicle accident, you can have so much information pushed into the brain from the accident that can actually change your posture. So this is what we see. We'll see people arm up, turn to the right, looking, and got hit, and now their head is stuck this way because they put all this information in, and their body thinks that's normal now. And so we literally have to retrain the brain that normal is actually your head straight, not like this, or like this, or like that, or whatever goes on. The problem comes in is when you have chronic inflammation. And the inflammation from the head injury can drive that. The inflammation from the thoughts, traumas, and toxins can drive all that. But what would happen if, and you may have seen this, so if you're somebody who has limped for, say, a couple of weeks because your leg hurts, you notice how it's hard to stop that limp? That's because you're actually patterning your brain that that's normal. So you're plastically patterning it to think that this is how it has to move, because it's learned that's what walking looks like. So you chronically change. Neuroplasticity, or change, happens in whatever you keep putting into it. So if you put garbage in, you'll get garbage out. So why is this important? Because this is what we need to train. This is a continual thing throughout life. If we want to stay in a healthy state, we know health is correlated to posture, health is correlated to blood pressure, health is correlated to vagal nerve function, health is correlated to neurological function. There's all these mechanisms will tell us how healthy you are, and you want to pattern yourself so that when you do get stressed, you stay in that healthy state, not you revert to stress and stay there chronically long term. That's when we start getting disease and dysfunction. So most people aren't aware that 90% of all the data the brain receives is actually coming from the spine. I'll say that again. 90% of the data that you receive is coming from your spine. So what do we see is happening in the population of people nowadays? If we go to the airport, what do people look like? Do they look like this, or do they look like this? They look like this, right? And I'm just as culpable as anybody else. But the thing is, if you want to be healthy, we know the farther forward your head goes, the more you go into fight or flight, the more you will actually turn on the stress response. Because if you're not aware, the stress response looks like this. This is why there's correlative changes where when you adjust somebody and pull their head back, their blood pressure will go down, and we'll literally watch disease and dysfunction processes go away because you're taking them out of the fight or flight response. So do we want to train ourselves to be sick and stressed out? Stay in this position, breathe from your lungs, eat inflammatory foods, eat things that will put you in fight or flight. Think about things that will put you in fight or flight. If we want to be healthy, we need to feed our body the right nutrients. We need to feed our body the right thought process. And we need to try to limit the amount of trauma that we have. And that will push us the other way. Because understand, my goal here is to help you be pliable and adaptable. Because going into fight or flight doesn't mean that you're going to die and get sick, because you're supposed to leave it 15 minutes after you go into it. But it's when you stay in that chronic state, then you turn on, you start turning up your genetic expression of disease, whatever you're prone to, and that's how we turn things on. So whatever your family has expressed through generations is what is primed to turn on when you get stressed out. So if your family is prone to turning on diabetes, type 1 or autoimmune, that means when you get stressed out, you actually turn on those genes to start making that disease. Just as when we turn down the stress response, now you start inhibiting those genes from turning on that disease. And this is how epigenetics works, is that your expression of sickness is based on how you experience your life. Is it a stressful or not stressful life? And this is in that subconscious part of the brain. It's frontal lobe as well, but we'll see 30% of your immune response is subconscious. So this is why it's really important about what you put in. The food you eat, the things you think about, how much movement you have, all these things are really important because they'll determine if you make that subluxation complex or not. Does it make sense? So if we want to grow health, we want to practice healthy things. If we want to grow disease, we can practice disease things. So if we look at people, we know this intuitively. We know if we don't move and we eat junk, we feel like junk, right? But if we move, we eat the right things, we have the right relationships, we feel good. So there's a feedback mechanism in us. It's just that the good stuff isn't always the easy stuff. I don't want to ride a bike as hard as I can and be sweating all over the place because it's fun. It's because I know that when I'm 90, I want to be able to move. I also want to eat that ice cream and pizza every day, but I know that's not going to be good for me either. So the thing is, understanding, I'm not telling you can't do certain things. I'm just saying limit it. Try to do what's right 90% of the time and you'll be okay. It's the problem comes in is that when we eat a hamburger every day, when we don't move and we sit in front of the TV every day, and we don't get our cardio, we don't get our muscle stuff in. That's what drives that pattern, that stress pattern in the brain called subluxation. And that's what drives the bones to be misaligned. And then they put in faulty information. And now the output changes. And the output will change how the organs work. The output will change how you actually perceive the world. Because if you want to be stressed out, be in an inflamed state. That means inflammation. And you can literally drive anxiety and depression issues through the roof. So that's one of the things that we see. We're in the most sedentary generation we've ever seen. And we're eating the most inflammatory products we've ever seen. And now we have the most anxiety and depression and loneliness that we've ever seen. Because the brain is inflamed. Your perception is not correct. Sitting in front of a computer screen for 8 hours a day and then going home and sitting in front of the television and not moving at all is definitely going to cause some issues. That make sense? So it's really simple stuff. Go ahead.
What about, we have an audience with different religious backgrounds or spirituality backgrounds. Does prayer help?
Yes, 100%. So prayer is actually quite interesting because when you pray, you have to remove the tangible environment around you, and you have to actually push yourself to be more right brain driven. And you have to remove and think outside of yourself. So it literally removes you from the environment and puts you into a more relaxed state. So it will actually pull you out of this brainstem state when you pray and pull you into the relaxation state. So that's why we see people who pray or meditate quite often will have very low stress responses, because it's actually driving them to a bigger perspective of reality, a bigger perspective of what's going on. Another example of this is when you go to the mountains, it also drives right brain function, or the sea or the ocean and you're in awe. That also drives vagal nerve function. So prayer will drive vagal nerve function. Prayer will drive vagal nerve function. Being in the mountains or looking at things that are very big and bigger than you will put you in that state, which will pull you out of that brain state of stress and force you to heal. So yes, 100% being in that state of thanksgiving, prayer outside of yourself changes your perspective, like we were talking about, and will actually make you heal yourself. They've shown multiple studies on chronic prayer and immune system improvement, chronic prayer and white blood cell count going up, viral load going down, multiple things like that. So you can see overall body health improving. So the takeaway I want you to understand is the patterns that we see on your EEG are those stress patterns. That's what we're trying to change. And we're trying to change them with multiple things, through light, through laser, through different neurofeedback training, because when we pull you out of that, your body knows what to do. It has that innate intelligence, and it will do the right thing. It will realign you. It will heal you. It's just we have to pull you out of stress, put you back into relaxation, and then those patterns will actually go away. So that's the ultimate goal, is to get you in that relaxed state 80% of the time, instead of being in that stress state 80% of the time. And then your body will actually heal itself. Do we have any questions?
With the neurofeedback, because I know there's a process and,
Mhm.
and you adjust the different waves and the hertz and
Mhm.
all that. Does once your brain is retrained, and that
Yeah, it'll
relax
stay.
it?
Yeah, it'll stay. As long as you don't have a head injury, you might need a little tune up every once in a while, but it will stay, and it's based on your life. So the question is, what happens after we've done the neurofeedback? How long does it last? As long as we don't have a major physical trauma, we see it long lasting. So you're actually training the body to stay healthy and keep these patterns as we keep living. The one limitation we run into, though, is what aging is gradual neurodeath. So as we age, we lose the amount of mitochondria we have. So by the age of 50, you have half the mitochondria you had when you were 18. So this is why you don't heal as quickly, as you don't have as much energy in the body. So that's why we put the laser in, to give you more energy. But the aging, if you want to make sure that you age gracefully instead of a major decrease, you want to make sure that you keep the brain in a healthy state. And that's what the neurofeedback's goal is to do. So the adjustment breaks the stress pattern, but the neuro actually trains it to stay. And as long as you don't have any major head injuries or changes in your life that are very substantial, it's very long lasting. So once we change it, it stays. As long as you don't get a big knock on the head, or something like all of a sudden you're getting pumped full of a bunch of pharmaceuticals that can interfere, it's long lasting. Any other questions? We're good? Excellent. I want to thank you guys for being here. I hope we learned some new stuff about how that pattern shows up in the brain, how the pattern can show up in your body, and what we're looking for. Because when we see those abnormal patterns, we want to pull you out of stress so you don't make the disease and dysfunction. We want to pull you back into that relaxed state, and then we see overall things change. Because you're going to see not just physical changes, you're going to see emotional, cognitive changes. These are normal side effects. It's actually been shown that the adjustment alone, through over 40,000 people being adjusted, the number one outcome is decreased anxiety and depression. If you don't understand what that means, that just basically means the frontal lobe is turning on. Now the executive center turns on and your body actually starts healing. So I want to thank you all for being here and understanding the power of what you're actually receiving. Have a good night.